This is an SM Media production.
Hi folks, and welcome to the debut episode of the Celtic Report, the SM Media exclusive Celtic podcast. I'm Scott McPike. It is an absolute pleasure to be your host as always. Delighted to introduce this new platform. We have an exclusive Celtic channel that we are launching today. Well, this is the debut podcast. We're going to be doing a wee debut podcast, and then going forward we'll have a podcast every week when the season begins. So it's going to be a really interesting season. It's obviously been a lot of change at the club, as we'll talk about later on. And to get the first show on the road, it's only fitting we get two really good guests to kick us off. First things first, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome onto the show a person who I've been on a few podcasts with, just never had the opportunity to get him on mine, but it's an absolute pleasure to welcome onto the show. You'll see him on Celtic by Numbers, you'll see him on a lot of different Celtic podcasts. It's a pleasure to welcome to the show Alan Morrison.
Yeah, thank you very much, Scott, and good luck with the new channel, by the way. That's very exciting. The first day, that's incredible. So yeah, good luck with it.
Very good. Take a lot of credit in the fact that you're part of the first show, because I'll only invite the best guests on for the first show. So take a lot of positive from that. And to making his debut on the channel, it's an absolute pleasure. Again, a person who you're probably going to see a lot on the channel going forward. He's also going to be writing a piece for the channel this week as well. It's a pleasure to welcome in his first appearance, Michael Shearer.
It's a pleasure to be joining you today. I was very excited to see the opportunity to come up on Twitter, and I'm glad to be here today, especially with Alan as well.
Yeah, Alan, it's a great pleasure to have Alan on. We're going to be talking about a lot of stuff Celtic related. It's been a very busy period. There's been a lot of change. Maybe not change we thought. I didn't think when I was launching this that Brendan Rodgers would be the Celtic manager, but that's something to talk about later on. This was a plan maybe about a year ago. I certainly didn't think the manager of Celtic would be Brendan Rodgers when I was launching this, so very interesting to get into that later on. But just a wee outlay of what's going to be coming up on the channel. Monday, we're going to have articles going out about Marco Tilio, Cameron Carter-Vickers, Ange Postecoglou. We've managed to get a wee chat with John Greakin, who's wrote a really good book on Ange Postecoglou, which is due for release. He's going to be telling us all about what happened with Ange Postecoglou in Japan, coming to Celtic, and obviously the big opportunity for Tottenham Hotspur, which we'll get into probably in this show in a wee while. But Alan, it's probably been a summer like no other. It's been very, very busy from a Celtic perspective.
Yeah, I think if I can take a step back, the one sort of slightly sad thing is I don't think as a supporter we've ever actually celebrated the season that just went properly. It doesn't feel like we've properly had a sort of outpouring of joy about that. I mean, I was very fortunate to be there on Cup final day. You know, it was a good atmosphere, etc. But, you know, on the build up to the game, and even on the game itself, when you looked at the players and the manager especially on his lap on the way around, you kind of sensed that this was the end of something. And it was a little bit mixed emotions, I suppose. And obviously it all unraveled in terms of Postecoglou leaving quite quickly after that. So I think there's a sense of frustration, and I feel certainly, that we've not properly celebrated, properly marked what was a remarkable achievement to win another treble. You know, despite what people say, I know we can get into a debate at some point about the nature of Scottish football, the financial disparities, and so on and so forth. But as we all know, right, you know, especially in cup football, it can often be a lottery, and it's very difficult to win a treble. You know, there haven't been that many won over Celtic's history, certainly. So yeah, that was the first thing I'd like to say. And then of course the managerial change happened, which I think was probably a little bit quicker than what we thought. I mean, I formed the view. I think a lot of people formed the view very quickly that Ange was a serious individual, a very capable, more than capable manager. He turned virtually every single team that he'd ever managed into a winning team. The way that he quickly turned Celtic after about 6 to 8 weeks it took him to get to make his mark on the team and turn them into a sort of relentless winning machine in Scotland, especially. And it got to the stage where we were joking on the Huddle Breakdown podcast that, because we try and get into the sort of tactical analysis, that our host Enda was sort of like, well, what are we going to talk about this week? Because, you know, we turned up, we played exactly the same way as we played the week before, we won 4-0, and what else is there to say? And it almost got to that stage that domestically he turned the team into such an efficient machine, really, and I've never seen anything like it in terms of the consistency of performance. Having said all that, it also was obvious that things were tailing off a bit towards the end of the season. So whether this, and I think it has come to light that the Tottenham links were something that had been in the works for a wee while, not just came to fruition at the end of the season. And then I think the team must have sensed that, because their performance levels, I think, dropped off, and the stats say they dropped off as well. So in a sense, I think you as a fan as well, the other thing you do is whenever there's change, you rationalize. We all do that, we're human, and you sort of start to think, well, actually, the team, it was regressing a little bit. Were the team capable of going another season, especially training at the intensity that Postecoglou kind of drove them? I don't know. Would we have been able to lift that squad to a higher level in Europe? Again, I don't know. I don't know if his philosophy scaled that well to a European level of competition. So, we are where we are, and football and things change very quickly, and suddenly we're looking at a new future. So yeah, it's been fascinating. But I come back to, it would have been nice to have marked the treble a little bit more. I think that's my only kind of regret.
Yeah, I think that's something that's very interesting. Like when Celtic obviously had a lot of trebles over the past years, and they've been kind of celebrated. But it's one that's kind of been overshadowed by this change in the managerial department, and it's one that was, well, we kind of knew. I continue to say, Michael, when Scott Munn, who I don't know if anybody knows, was very high up in the City Group, when he was announced as Tottenham's chief executive, I thought there was maybe something coming of this. I didn't know if it was going to be that quick. But when Conte was told he was no longer needed at Tottenham, and Scott Munn was hired, he was quite high up in the City Group, I thought there was something potentially in the thing. And again, as I keep saying to people, and I'm sure I'll get your thoughts on this as well, 2 years ago, Ange Postecoglou was in Japan. Did he ever think he was going to get an opportunity in European football, let alone a club like Tottenham? So that opportunity, obviously, he can't turn down. But we have to look back, in Ange Postecoglou's legacy at Celtic is nothing short of remarkable. Recruitment was spot on. The ability, which we spoke about, the 3 losses to Celtic, the Rangers game, Hearts, Livingston, and then after that, just this turn of a switch. And after that, it was just dominance from there, and we saw a completely transformational side, and I think it's only one that can be celebrated. In 2 years, what Ange Postecoglou did for Celtic was unbelievable.
I think what Alan said was very important as well, though, and that how long could you keep that going? Because when you say could you have done 3 seasons like that, it would have been very difficult to keep that intensity going. Whereas now we've got Brendan Rodgers, things are going to be different. It's going to be a different sort of system, possibly in Europe as well. In the league, it might not be as different, but he's going to have to show more pragmatism, possibly on the European stage. I'm not meaning like 5-4-1 defensive formations, but just a little bit more tactical nuances. Ange did adapt ever so slightly sometimes in how he lined up the side, but it wasn't completely different. Whereas with Rodgers, he's expressed that as well. In the interview he done a couple of days ago, he was saying that in defence, he was playing a 3-4-3, and in attack, it was a 4-2-3-1. And it's just things like that with Rodgers. He has that flexibility to change systems, and I think that's crucial if you want to get further in Europe than where Celtic have been in previous years. You've got to remember, under Rodgers, in his second season, he had to go through all the Champions League qualifiers, yet again, after the first season. Then he took the side in Europa League. We won the first leg against Zenit, albeit we get beaten in the second leg. But that's the furthest that we've been in the past couple of years under Rodgers. So he's got that in his arsenal to bring that to Celtic. And you also got to look at what he did at Leicester in the Conference League. And I know people like to criticise the Conference League, but it's not the easiest competition to get far in. And that's what Rodgers will want to do at Celtic now. They want to take us further in Europe, because that's how he's going to improve his CV. And he's going to look and he's going to say to himself, if I can take Celtic further in Europe, it's going to be a stepping stone. Yes, that's what Rodgers sees it as. But he's here to improve his CV even more than it already is, particularly in Europe. And he takes the league very serious. He takes all the cup competitions serious, but specifically the Champions League, he's got his eyes on that, and he's wanting to take Celtic further in that than they've been in previous seasons.
Alan, I think it's very interesting, obviously, with Brendan Rodgers. There is obviously this thing of, 3 years ago when Brendan Rodgers left, it wasn't well received. We have to look at that when we're looking at Brendan Rodgers, and I know, speaking to a lot of Celtic fans, there wasn't a great deal of hope to see Brendan Rodgers back. But when you look over that, you look at the manager, you look at what he did for Celtic, what he did at Leicester now, the way it ended at Leicester. Obviously, I don't think you can put the blame at Rodgers' door. But to get Brendan Rodgers back, the manager that he is, I think it's a massive coup. I really do.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I try and look at things in the long term and with a strategic lens, but I thought that this recruitment needed to be with a view to winning the league next year, because it gives you direct entry into the expanded Champions League, and I believe as a minimum direct entry into the expanded Champions League of 2023-24 will guarantee your club something in the region of 55 million. That is an enormous bounty at the end of the season. So for me, when all the candidates came out and the betting lists and all this sort of thing, Brendan Rodgers was the one that struck me as being the least risky option in that regard. So that's the first thing. Second thing is to say, again, at the risk of revisionism, again, try to look at both sides of these things. It wasn't ideal how Rodgers left, for sure. In the middle of February, with the season coming to an end, and it was nothing had been won at that point. So part of the League Cup, so that was less than ideal, and it was all done very backdoor, leaving in the middle of the night type of thing. But you have to appreciate the environment that Brendan Rodgers was operating under there at Celtic at the time. And without getting into the sort of murky world of internal Celtic politics, he's at a very different club now. So if I can sort of flip forward to what he said when he was unveiled, I think it was very telling. A lot of the things that he had been pushing for in terms of background improvements to the football operations, especially around the way that the scouting and recruitment function worked, the way that the sports science function worked, improvements to some of the facilities at Lennoxtown. These were all things he pushed for, and frankly had been kind of pushed back against under the previous CEO. And I think he one of the reasons that he came back was because he could see that Celtic under Postecoglou had really taken a step forward in terms of modernising their football operations, and therefore he felt that that was something that he could work with. So it wasn't ideal how he left, and it did leave a bad taste. But I see both sides of it, and I don't think he was supported in quite the way that he would like to have been supported. And then the other really interesting aspect for me is what is the Brendan Rodgers that we've got back as a club now compared to what we originally had 7 years ago, actually. 7 years ago. Because remember, another thing that you probably misnomer about Rodgers is he isn't somebody that flits about clubs. He spent 4 years at Liverpool. He spent 3.5 at 2.5 at Celtic. He spent 4 years nearly at Leicester, etc. So it ended badly at Leicester, obviously, because for most managers that's how it goes. But remember, he was in charge of what is a middle to bottom EPL team. Under Rodgers, they finished fifth, and 8th in the English Premier League. That is Leicester City's best run of top flight finishes since the 1920s. Okay, so that's a remarkable achievement to have done that. And I know they've had a lot of money to spend, but so did a lot of clubs in England.
I think it's important to say that a lot of the players were quite young as well. When you look at players like Maddison and Barnes, he really took them to another level. They weren't ready-made players when he joined Leicester.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, last season, I think, they had a left wing position. They had Thomas and Barnes, two guys that came through, I think. So he absolutely, that's one of his fortes. He won them the FA Cup. They'd never won the FA Cup in their history. And Scott, you mentioned the Europa Conference. Michael, I think, mentioned the Europa Conference run, which is the furthest that Leicester have ever been in Europe. So that's his legacy at Leicester. That's an incredible legacy, actually. And of course, it ended badly, and that's what people will cling on to. But again, the context of that is that Leicester were hemorrhaging a lot of money, and so they were selling players like Fofana for 80 million, and then getting them to replace them with sort of 10 million pound players. Now that sounds, in Scotland, that sounds insane to us, but that's a big deal in the EPL, and that's a difficult thing to pull off, and you're on a knife edge in that sense. So another aspect of it, and I think Michael touched on this really well, is that I think we've got a much more tactically flexible manager now than what we had when he joined. I think when he joined Celtic 7 years ago, he was very much a 4-2-3-1. He'd managed a dominant Liverpool team. His Swansea team had been quite dominant in the divisions that they were in. And he was used to imposing his style on the game. And I think we saw in Europe, even in Champions League, we went toe-to-toe with Man City in 2 games and managed to get 2 draws. But if I'm being honest, it could have been 5-1. It could have been, the score could have been anything in either of those games. But I think at Leicester, clearly he had to learn a different approach. And we had a young lad, an analyst, who follows Leicester, does a lot of the data analysis stuff similar to what I do with Celtic. And he talked about Leicester, talked about Rodgers' time, and he talked about this flexibility. He did try inverted fullbacks. He did play 3 at the back. He did play with wing backs. He did play 4-2-3-1, and he really adapted his style depending on the opposition. And one of the things that was very different was he very much set the team up with the opposition's strengths and weaknesses in mind. Now, in Scotland, are you really going to set up a team worried about which Ross County midfielder is going to give you most concern? With all due respect, you're probably not. But as Michael said, in Europe, and certainly in games at Tynecastle and at Ibrox, etc., you want that little bit of additional kind of flexibility. Postecoglou was all about simplicity. His messages were simple. His instructions were simple. He left the players in no doubt as to what was required, and we were going to do it. We're going to do it well, and that was it. And if it wasn't working, we just put on new players. I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but that was essentially it. But I think with Rodgers, we'll see a lot more stuff for us to discuss on the huddle breakdown in terms of tactical flexibility, as Michael rightly said. And I think that's the bit that I'm really fascinated to see as to what is this new version. There's slightly more subdued, I would say. He's come in without any fanfare. He's been very sort of roll the sleeves up, looked very serious, got down to business sort of demeanor about him. I like it a lot. And he seems to be here, as I say, he's saying, I'm here to win. I'm just here to win, and that's it. And so I think we're going to see a very interesting Brendan Rodgers team this time. I think it's going to be a few little surprises and a few little tweaks that I think are going to keep the likes of me that like all that stuff, entertained.
Yeah, and I think
what surprised me was when he was like that, he said that he's going to be here for 3 years. I don't think anyone expected Brendan Rodgers to say that in the press conference. I'm here for 3 years. That was one of the most telling things, that his heart's here. He's set for 3 years.
And he's obviously a very different manager in terms of being in England. He's learned his lessons from Liverpool at Celtic. He went to Leicester, and yes, he had Alan touched there about 2 fifth-place finishes and an FA Cup win. He's a completely different manager. And Michael, I think as well, when he left Leicester, I wasn't sure that he was a man who was looking to get back into management. And I do think there's a wee bit of the Dermot Desmond factor in here, of the very persuasive salesman that Mr. Desmond can be. He's done it before in the past, and I think that can be a very, very big factor towards getting Brendan Rodgers back, because he didn't strike me when he left as a man who was desperate to get back into a job. He seemed to me as a man who was looking for a wee break, and something has definitely gave him the belief that he could go back into Celtic and pick up where he left off. Or I think that's the big thing there. I think he saw the squad, he saw the progression in the club, what he was looking for in the past is now there, and it's a lot better club in terms of kind of a modern football club. And it just looks to me as if he saw the vision and saw the project and thought, I can pick up where I left off here, and the club's in a better place.
I think there's been promises made that we won't know, but there must be very interesting promises when it comes to recruitment specifically, and how he feels that he can improve Celtic in a European scale. But I'm not meaning that £20 million signings. It probably won't be to that extent, but it's going to be players that maybe between 5 to 10 million, maybe a little bit more. And he feels that he can improve those players as well and bed them into the side in areas that he feels we can strengthen. And in Europe, Celtic have struggled ever since maybe around the European Cup final in 2003. We've not really made a mark. Rangers have been to 2 UEFA Cup finals twice since then. Celtic fans really want to see that progression in Europe, have those special nights at Celtic Park, albeit everyone goes on about the atmosphere at Celtic Park, but we really need to be getting those big wins to get the fans excited. We've had great domestic success in the past 10, 15 years, but in Europe, we really need to improve. And that's what Rodgers will have his eye on, because it'll build his legacy even more if he can take Celtic further, because he'll be the manager that progressed Celtic in Europe in a time where that European progression wasn't really there. There was been times in the past 15 years where we weren't even in the Champions League. We were in the Europa League. We were finishing third in groups. So Rodgers will be looking at it as a big opportunity to make his name in Europe at Celtic.
And obviously, we'll move on to recruitment. It's been a weird summer in terms of recruitment on both sides of the floor. We'll start with obviously the big outgoing, which was a very random tweet that came through to say that there was a €25 million bid for Jota from a Saudi Arabian side. Alan, I've got to be honest, I thought it was nonsense to begin with, but from what we're seeing from Saudi Arabia and the money that's floating about, it was a no-brainer from a Celtic perspective, wasn't it? You can't turn that money down.
Well, this is it, and what we have to, and listen, yeah, the whole, we're moving into a different world now, where thanks to the Saudi government, who seem to be bankrolling 4 teams in that league, it's really weird. That's going to be a massive disruptor to world football, actually, not just English football. I was stunned that they found their way to Scottish football, although I think Nuno Espirito Santos is the manager at that club. And I think he's known Jota since he was a wee boy. Yeah. So I think there was a bit of local knowledge applied there. But listen, as Ange teed it up last year, he's saying, look, in some ways you can't get too fond of these players, because what Celtic have to do to get closer to the type of trading model that we see amongst Celtic's peers in Europe. So I'm thinking about, your Ajaxes, your Portos, your Benficas. We're a long way from their trading model success. I don't necessarily mean the way that they're run, because both the Portuguese clubs especially are in massive debt, but I mean, in terms of the trading models, now I know it's a completely different market, and I'm not saying that we should just copy what they do. We can't, but we need to move closer to that type of model from where we are. And that means that you when a bid like that comes along, you sell, and then you reinvest in and upscale the overall quality of the squad. You don't just spend the money on that. You do what Celtic have done, which is to say, right, actually, we're going to use some of this money to raise the salary ceiling, and that way keep some of our core talent, because you can't flip everybody. You can't, there's no one size fits all here, right? This is the thing to say. We talk about a player trading model, we talk about recruitment systems, but there's no one size fits all. There's various ways to do this, and I think we've seen that from Celtic in the last month or so, whereby we've flipped in one of our top players, got a huge amount of money in, we've reinvested some of that back into the wage structure to give the likes of Kyogo and McGregor, etc., new contracts, and Maeda, and we've bought a number for at least sort of players in the sort of 1 to 3 million range, who are young, coming from sort of under, maybe slightly under scouted markets, let's say, with a hope to either developing them or again. But the to me, almost the most fascinating deal was the McGregor one, the 5-year contract, because my initial reaction was raised eyebrows. You're giving a 30-year-old a 5-year contract, and you're probably at the same time raising the wage ceiling. Now, I think there's some clever accountancy going on here, if I'm being honest. I think we've used it as an opportunity to give McGregor a bump, but then it's amortized over 5 years. So that kind of that kind of helps with the accounting side of it. But I think as well, when I sat down and thought about it, it makes perfect sense, because if Celtic didn't have McGregor and Rodgers said to Mark Lowell, I need you to find me somebody like Callum McGregor, how much do you think that would cost? Yeah. And I'm not just talking about the transfer fee, I'm talking about the wages as well. So I posit that what we're giving McGregor over 5 years is significantly less than if we had to go and recruit Callum McGregor and pay him for 5 years. So I think it's a smart move. And the other side of it is, as much as you need your Jotas and probably your Hatates and maybe Abadas to be players that maybe come in, you see them for 2 or 3 years, and then they get hopefully flipped for a good profit. You need a core. You can't do that with everyone. You have to have a core of players through the team. Now, hopefully Kyogo at 28, him being retained, hopefully he's going to be a core player. McGregor's clearly going to be a core player. I'd love it if they made Carter Vickers a core player. And that's not, it's not just a literal spine of the team, but it's a sort of psychological spine of the team that you sort of say, look, you guys are being rewarded because you're staying. So yes, so come here. Not only have you got an opportunity to earn, life-changing money by getting a transfer somewhere else, but actually, if you want to stay, we'll look after you as well. And I think that's an intrinsic part of the model as well. It's not just about flipping players. It's about a mix and match approach to get the best use of assets across the squad, and also to have some stability as well.
Yeah. And Michael, I think when you look at Celtic's incoming so far, and obviously 2 of these are confirmed and 2 of these are, I would imagine, confirmed in the next couple of days, but I look at the age first and foremost. I look at an Odin Thiago Holm and think he's without a doubt a player for the future who fits that kind of 2 million bracket, who could go on and 5 times that in the future, because he will get opportunities. He's already played at every level for Norwegian youth, a top talent in Norway, and to come in, I think there's a lot of promise there. It's the same with Marco Tilio, obviously already kind of picked up an injury, but again, he's a player who will get games, and I think will be more of a future prospect. And I don't know how much Brendan Rodgers has had on these signings, those 2 in particular, but I look at those as very much prospect signings for the future to go in line with your core that you already have, because I think Alan's spot on. I did expect to see a sale this summer from Celtic. I think when you've got a side that's doing so well, you'll always get offers from big clubs. It looked as if it was going to be Abada, and it maybe still might, but I didn't see it being Jota. But I look at it now and think, if there's no other sales, then I think you've got 4 potentially promising talents to come in who can complement the kind of first team squad well and make appearances and just give that massive squad depth a further boost.
I think one of the most important things I was thinking about was to get a similar fee for Jota that we did Kieran Tierney. Now, Kieran Tierney had a big involvement in Europe on the European scale, goals that he'd scored, goals that he'd created. To get that fee for Jota. Now, Kieran Tierney was a left back, a very young left back, which is a rarity, but the quality he showed in that scale. So it's great from Celtic to get that money. And a big coincidence at the same time that Saudi Arabia are putting so much money into football. And Nuno Espirito Santo, a Portuguese manager, knew Jota well and wanted to recruit him alongside Benzema and Kante. Great for Celtic. Now, when we look at Odin Thiago Holm, something I found very interesting when I looked at age of him, I didn't expect him to have a lot of football behind him, but he's been in the first team for 3 years. And he's only 20 years old. That's quite a lot of football for a central midfielder to be playing. Now, he can play as a defensive midfielder and a centre midfielder. And to have had that much football, I think it's very interesting that Celtic have been able to get him for that fee, because I didn't think he'd played as much football as he actually had. And now when we look at Marco Tilio, I think he's a very exciting player, very two-footed, likes to get shots off, was in the Australian A-League team of the season last year. Very exciting, can play anywhere across the front line, which is very good for Celtic. I've noticed that the signings are very flexible and they can play multiple positions, which is crucial to being adaptable. It's also the same with Yang Hun-jun. He's played up front, he's played off the left, he's played off the right. Albeit this season he's not been as involved in as many goals as he was last year in Korea, but last season he was very impressive with the goals and assists he had. And then we have Kun Kyu, who, my pronunciation, sorry about that. It's very interesting that we're recruiting a player from second league in Korea. Now, I have read that the quality difference between the 2 leagues isn't as much as people may think, and he's a very under-the-radar signing. Now, the Celtic recruitment department obviously know a lot more about recruiting players than I do, so I believe that they've saw something very promising in him. Now, he's quite flexible, he can play a number of positions as well. So when I look at all the signings that we're making, they're flexible players who've plenty of football ahead of them. They've got maybe 3-4 years at Celtic, which is very exciting. And we're not spending tons of money. But when you also look at it, £3 million on a signing from Norway is very different for £3 million and a signing from the English Championship. We're not buying players from England like we used to, and you don't get the same value. I know we got Matt O'Reilly, but he was great value for the money. But when you look at signings from Japan and Korea, you're going to get great value, and they've played plenty of football and they have experience, and they're coming here to play at a higher level.
And Alan, obviously the two Korean signings which we're expecting to be announced, Yang Yeon-jun is expected to come in from Kangwon, and Kwon Yok-kyu is expected to be the second signing. Now, these two signings to me now, Michael's right, I think, about the standard of Korea now. We've seen he's taken a bit of time to get settled in, but you can tell there's a really good goal-scoring striker there, and he's going to take a bit of time again just to go. I think we'll see further development in him. But these two signings are clearly what Celtic have done so well in the past couple of years, just looking at a market which nobody's really been kind of tapping into over the past few years, particularly at this kind of side of the world. And there's gems there, and that's what we've seen it with Hatate, we've seen it with Kyogo, Maeda. There's a lot of talent you can pick up, and you can pick them up fairly cheap. And a couple of years in Scottish football, you sell them on for big money. Now, it might not happen. It's not. There's a lot of same with Iwata, obviously making that deal permanent. I think we've seen enough with Iwata to say, yeah, that he can play a big part in this Celtic side. But it shows, though, that just because Postecoglou has left, Celtic will continue to explore the Asian market because there's so much talent there that you can pick up for little to no money.
Well, yes, again, so much as we talked about, the Jota deal being evidence of how the trading model needs to work in some respect. Similar with these deals. What was fascinating to me was that, Marco Tilio said in his interview that, Celtic had been trailing him for at least a year before that. He's and the Korean central midfielder, similar. I believe Postecoglou wanted Yang at the same time as they brought Owen in January, but it didn't work out. It couldn't get agreement on that. So these are players that are well scouted and have been scouted for a long time. And again, listen, some people might get hung up on, it's not a Rodgers signing. It's like, no, you're looking at it completely the wrong way, right? This is the club operating the way it has to operate.
Yes.
It has to be. It's not agnostic of the manager. It can't be. The manager has ultimate, veto over any deal, right? But he gives us requirements, and the scouting department come back and say these are the people that fit within our budget and within the culture of what our strategy is, etc., and therefore, which way do you want to go? And ultimately, the manager's accountable for what happens with the team, so he has to have the final say. But even though these players have been scouted prior to Rodgers coming on board, doesn't mean that Rodgers hasn't had the final say. He has, but it also means what it's showing is that Celtic are investing time and effort to really track these young players for quite some considerable time. And that, what does that do? Well, it de-risks the signing. You know what you're getting, both not just the ability of the player, but also the person as well, the personality. How are they going to adapt? Etc. These things are hugely important as well. So I think it's another way that the trading model has to operate. They're relatively low risk signings because of how well they've been scouted. They're not high cost. I think Michael did an excellent job outlining the flexibility that each of those players mentioned will bring. And if you go back to what did Rodgers say when he joined, when he in his press conference to fan media, he was asked, what do you think needs to improve in the squad that you've inherited from Postecoglou? He talked about power and pace. He talked about power, pace, and flexibility. Those are the three things that he mentioned, and that's really and he's always got his mind on how do we get better in Europe, because I think again a mistake that has been made in Celtic over the last 10 years is that we've been using the Scottish SPFL as the benchmark for success. And you can pat yourself on the back that, this is a great trading model that we've got here, because look how much money we make compared to all these other teams, etc. But that's just it's false economy. The benchmark that we need to use analytically, statistically, performance-wise, has to be those Benficas, Portos, Ajaxes. That's your benchmark. How are you performing against your Salzburgs, your Leipzigs, those kind of teams? Because at the moment, the sad reality is that as much as you might think Celtic are a powerhouse in Scotland as regards flipping players and getting transfer fees in, we're no better in the transfer market in terms of turning low value into high value. We're no better than an AZ Alkmaar or a Midtjylland. That's the level Celtic operate at in terms of their market efficiency, right? And that's not good enough. That's not good enough. And guess what? We lose to these teams or struggle against these teams in Europe. So yeah, to raise that level, you've got to be more aggressive in the transfer market. But there's many facets to that. There's the big deals, but then there's these smaller deals as well. But to de-risk it, you've got to be have done your homework. It's a multi-year thing. You have lots of data, etc. Because I think a couple of recent deals have really stung badly at Celtic, which was the Barkas deal and the Ajeti. I think they're two deals where people got their fingers burnt really badly, and I think there's a lot of reluctance to go down that road and make those same mistakes again. Which is why I think we're maybe pitching a little bit a lower level, but with a much lower risk attached to it as well.
And that the Barkas point is very interesting because all reports seem to suggest that Celtic are looking for a new goalkeeper now. Alan, it's very interesting when Celtic are looking down that route. Now, Joe Hart, I think, has been a very serviceable goalkeeper for 2 seasons under Postecoglou. But when I look at a Brendan Rodgers goalkeeper, I'll look at a Craig Gordon, I'll look at a Kasper Schmeichel. Joe Hart, to me, doesn't fit that bill. Now, it might just be another thing. Has that been a Brendan Rodgers thing of, we need something different here? Joe Hart's serviceable, but do we need an upgrade going forward?
Oh, for sure we do. I mean, we've been saying this on the Huddle Breakdown for more than 2 years. We've not had a goalkeeper that fits in with the ethos of the style of football we want to play. And Joe Hart, I think the way you characterise it there, Scott, is perfectly fair. He's serviceable. He's actually, if you take away all the sort of the fact that Joe Hart is big name, all these England caps, he's a great guy, he's brilliant in the dressing room. Take away all that, his actual goalkeeping performance has been okay. It's been good. It's been what you'd expect,
and that's
really.
been fine though.
But,
because after the season Celtic had before Postecoglou came in, okay was acceptable, and that's the thing. That's the thing. But now, do you need something better?
Sure, because I mean, the sad fact is, for any Scottish club, the gap. Even we're talking about games in Europe, going back to I think Michael mentioned Seville and all that. Even under Strachan, when we really pared back the wage bill massively, and we had Gary Caldwell and Steve McManus in defence, very few teams at Champions League level won at Celtic Park. Very few. Now I know that the world has changed, right? And the big 5 leagues are miles ahead of everybody else now. So it's a different world that we operate in, but there is a massive gap there. And we saw it against Real Madrid. We saw it against Leipzig last season. So for Celtic to do well in Europe, one of the key positions is goalkeeper, because even if you don't have 10 outfield players on the pitch that are Champions League level, if you've got a Champions League goalkeeper, you've got, in a low scoring sport, you've got a chance. You've got a chance to nick that point that will get you that 3rd place, that will get you into the Europa League. You've got a chance of nicking a goal that might even get you into 2nd place, maybe. So we've not had that. Heart's not been good enough to turn 1 point into 3 or none into 1 at the Champions League level. I don't think those days are probably gone for him. So I think it is key that we get a goalkeeper. And I've very much changed my thinking from, we need a ball-playing goalkeeper. I think we just need one that at the Champions League level is going to give Celtic a chance. Because, again, I come back to, if you look at Celtic's best 3 European results over the last 10 years, right? And Michael's right, it's been slim pickings, right? There's the home and away victories over Lazio, and of course the victory over Barcelona. All 3 of those were down to Fraser Forster having an absolute storming game, right? So because that position at that level can make a massive difference. So I think it's right that we're looking for an upgrade in that position.
And Michael, I think with Celtic in the summer, I don't know how we'll get into this next and over the next couple of weeks, but the squad, I think when you, as Alan rightfully pointed out at the start of the show, we did see a big difference in terms of when a Carter Vickers was out the team. I don't think Celtic were as stable in defence. When an Alistair Johnson is going to be missing the first couple of months, are we going to see the likes of an Anthony Ralston coming in, who we know isn't the level of Alistair Johnson? But do Celtic need to look at the wider squad and go, we need Moy was a perfect example of this. Moy would come in very dependent for a season, but there's going to be a lot more younger players in. Do you need that kind of mix of experience as well? Is it a case of Celtic need to spend 5-6 million on a centre midfielder, or do you need to spend 2 million to get 3 kind of very adequate squad players in to fill that void? Because I don't think it was an accident that when Celtic's defensive problems started when Carter Vickers was out.
I think something I would like to say first, though, is the money that Celtic spent on Barkas, I think that will play a part in the money that we invest in a goalkeeper this summer.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's left a bitter taste in the mouth of Celtic, the money they spent on Barkas. He looked to be a decent goalkeeper, had Champions League experience, decent clean sheet numbers, but for the way he played at Celtic, we just wanted somebody in that could just stop the ball going out the net. It sounds really simple, but it got to almost a point where we were just craving a goalkeeper who was basically just good enough. But now we want to go to the next level. I'm not saying that a goalkeeper to the level of Fraser Foster, who's inhuman for the performances he put in against Lazio and Barcelona, the amount of shots he stopped in the net. But I do feel like we need to improve the goalkeeping position. And I think a club like Celtic are quite lazy in how they recruit goalkeepers. And I feel like with Barkas, they put some work in to get him and pay the money. But now they need to do that again and really just put the money in that position first and foremost. At centre-back, we definitely need a backup. We had a Jota in the Scottish Cup final, and that's not his position. He was caught out for the Inverness goal. We need to get another centre-back. It's interesting to see how Stephen Welsh will get on this season, whether he'll stay at the club. There has been bids put in for Stephen Welsh in the past, and I thought it was quite a decent fee, but whether Brendan Rodgers sees Stephen Welsh going to the next level, that's still to be seen. And when it comes to left back, I do feel like Alejandro Bernabé suits Rodgers' style far more than he did under Ange. A lot of Celtic fans have got quite excited over one through ball in pre-season, to be fair, but I do feel like a player like Alejandro Bernabé, he could go to the next level under Rodgers, especially if he's wanting to adapt the formation, maybe a 3-5-2 at times, with Bernabé having that much freedom going forward. So I feel like we need to improve in certain positions. Centre-back is certainly one. Goalkeeper is another. When it comes to right-back, Ralston is good enough for most games, but when it comes to the higher echelon of games, maybe Aberdeen away, Hearts away, Rangers away, he will get caught at times. But I don't think I will see Celtic buy another right back, to be honest. So it looks like we'll have Ralston at the start of the season. Left back, we've got Taylor and Bernabé, two very different players, and I think that's settled. But centre back, I think we could see another centre back coming in. Kobayashi, I'm still to be convinced, but he's a young player and he has more time to develop. The Celtic obviously seen something in him, and I think he needs more time as well. But if Rodgers doesn't see what Ange saw, we probably will recruit another centre back, and it could be the same with Welsh as well. So that's two uncertainties with them. Carter Vickers, I hope we tie him down to a contract, a longer contract. Most Celtic fans have been craving for that, but whether that will happen, there's still questions, because a player of Carter Vickers' quality, he's been one of the best centre-backs I've seen at Celtic, and that's including Virgil van Dijk. I don't think Virgil van Dijk was at the level at Celtic that Carter Vickers is currently.
Alan, I think one of Brendan Rodgers' best traits in his first spell was just the amount of improvement he got out of certain players. Now, the likes of a Joseph Simonovic, just for an example, yes, we saw it was a big outlay, but he never really found his feet. And then when Brendan Rodgers came in, there was just this wee tweak, and you saw this completely different player. Stuart Armstrong's another one, just to get a bit more freedom in midfield. There's a lot of players that I can think of in that first spell. Lustig, a perfect example. I thought Lustig was done before Brendan Rodgers came in, and he just tweaked something, and everybody just seemed to suit that system. Who from the current Celtic team, like maybe a Starfelt who at times has been kind of exposed at times, could he develop further under a Rodgers? Have you got the likes of a Matt O'Reilly, who I think is a terrific player, but I think at times his work rate could be an issue. Is there a certain Celtic players you think can further improve under Rodgers? Because I think that was one of his best things in his first spell.
Yeah. Sorry, Scott. Yeah, no, for sure. So I think, and I agree with Michael. I think centre back's a key area for us. You know, the disparity in quality between Celtic's right side with Johnston, Carter Vickers, and left side with Taylor and Starfelt is stark. And you know, if we had a left side that was of equal quality to the right side, I think we'd be on the way to having a decent Champions League level defence, actually. In terms of Starfield, I just don't think he's the sort of player. He did improve. Let me just say he did improve last year for sure. He did improve, and I give him credit for that. But at 28 years old, I don't think we're going to see a huge change in the way that he plays the game. He just doesn't defend in a way that I'm comfortable with. He's too optimistic, I call it. I don't like my defenders to be optimistic. He always thinks he can win the ball, and he gets caught under it a lot. So I don't think that'll change. He's got good recovery speed. That's the thing that kind of helps him a little bit. Greg Taylor is just the most lovable. It must be a coach's dream. The guy just works his socks off. He's so dedicated to improving himself. But clearly there's just some deficiencies there in terms, mostly physical really, in terms of height, pace, power. He's not going to change that, unfortunately. So hopefully we keep Greg around, but I think that's an area. I think Bernabé is a fascinating one. He's in some respects the most fascinating player in the squad. He's got some absolutely glaring weaknesses, and they're big ones because they're all about decision making. But his physical attributes, his balance, his power, his core strength, his pace, his ability to play, he pops up in all sorts of interesting positions on the pitch. I think he's got a huge array of tools to work with, and if Rodgers fancies him, I think he could be a player that would really shine. I think another one who didn't get as much starts last year that I think Rodgers will take to and develop is Abada. I think he'll see a lot in Abada. That he's exactly the sort of winger that I think Rodgers likes. He's direct. He's a goal threat. He wants goals from his wide players, and Abada's got that. So I think he's one, and I think O'Reilly's another one. I think O'Reilly plateaued a little bit last season. It was a lot of people latched onto his comments about, Rodgers coming and sitting with them and talking to them at lunchtime and all this sort of thing. It was just you may be reading too much into it, but maybe O'Reilly will be a young player that will really kick on under Rodgers as well. So I think if I had to pick three, those would be the three that I think I'd really be looking to. And maybe I think Rodgers will like, because I think they've got the attributes that Rodgers wants, and I think they're just ready to be pushed to that next level.
We are going to see Celtic in action over the next few days. They're going to head to the tour of Japan. They're going to place Yokohama F Marinos in the Nissan Stadium on Wednesday, and we will see them on Saturday. It'll be to Gamba Osaka and Suita City in Japan as well. Two really interesting games, Michael. It's going to be very fascinating to see. We saw a kind of bounce game and saw the 4-1 victory. We saw a few kind of tweaks that surprised a couple. And it's just going to be really interesting just to see how these friendlies kind of shape up what we're likely to see from a Brendan Rodgers team.
I think something that's maybe an interesting point to make is Awata. There's been a physical transformation in Awata. He looks more muscular.
Yes.
And I think that's something that Brendan Rodgers definitely pointed out. And I think Awata will suit Brendan Rodgers more. He's more likely to play under Brendan Rodgers, I think, especially with somebody like Callum McGregor as the lone pivot at times last season. And also what's important, I think, is players like Rocco Vata. Now, I am very excited about Rocco Vata. I was at a game last season, Motherwell at home, and I know we drew the game 1-0, but there was 2 balls that Vata put into the box in the later stages of the game, and he was very unlucky not to get 2 assists. And I think Vata is a very promising young player that will be looking to get into the first team. So I always think that's the most exciting part of pre-season, to see younger players get a chance and can they thrive. When you look at someone like Callum McGregor, he was able to do that in 2013 and he's never looked back. Now, I'm not saying anybody's going to be able to go to that level, but we're going to be able to see younger players. And Rodgers as a manager, it's not always about buying players with Rodgers. He wants to improve the players he has. He's not obsessed with spending lots of money. And I think that's a mischaracterisation that people have made of Rodgers in the past. When you look at players they got like Malumbu, it was just cheap options that he was given. But if you give Rodgers time with players, he's going to improve them. He's going to talk to them. And it's all about his tactical flexibility. He talks to players about his tactics and what he wants. They know exactly what they're needed to do in the pitch. Rodgers the type of manager, he's always in your ear. He'll tell you what he wants. When it comes to receiving the ball, your positioning. I remember seeing a video of Rodgers with Raheem Sterling when Raheem Sterling was a teenager at Liverpool, and Raheem Sterling was being very comedic, and Rodgers was very clear that you'll be sent home if you don't follow what I'm saying. So Rodgers has a lot of different characteristics as a manager that will be able to improve younger players, and I think Celtic fans want that as well. We want to see maybe more Scottish players getting into the first team. And under Rodgers, I think we might be able to see that.
We absolutely could, yeah, and it's going to be very fascinating to see how the friendlies come about. And it's been a really interesting show. We will be picking up on the friendlies in the next show. We will be back on the 31st of July, where we'll look at the kind of look ahead to the season as well. We're going to have a lot of articles coming out during the week, and it's been a really fascinating chat with you two guys. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. First of all, to Alan, thank you very much for coming on. It's been really good to get your insight and really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Scott. Good to meet Michael as well. And just thank you for having me. And anytime.
Absolute pleasure. And to Michael Shearer as well. Great first performance. Really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you on again.
It's been a pleasure to be with the two of you tonight. I've learned a lot from both of you and your opinions as well. Thanks a lot.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Please tune in to the next episode of the Celtic Report, and to follow our Twitter and Facebook channels, and we will have plenty of podcasts come out over the course of the season. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll see you soon. Cheers.